Passed unanimously. On to our next item, which is our business agenda. And I believe we have Elaine Hardy here with us for our declaration of racism as a public health crisis in the city of East Lansing. Thanks for being with us, Elaine.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to see everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to present this resolution for your approval. Since June, the City of East Lansing has made steps toward addressing the systemic issue of racism. It began with our city manager's statement denouncing racism and discrimination in all forms and committing to dismantling the systemic structures that uphold racism. Tonight, we join local and state municipalities and governments all across this nation in declaring racism a public health crisis. This past weekend, the American Medical Association declared racism a public health crisis. The resolution that you have before you is part of the framework for our strategy to build an inclusive and anti-racist place to live, work, and do business. This resolution reads in part, whereas race is a social construct with no basis in human biology and was created to uphold a system of oppression for Black and Brown people, and whereas racism is rooted in the foundation of America, beginning with chattel slavery in 1619. Much of the Black experience in America has been endured under slavery and Jim Crow, which allowed preferential opportunities for some while subjecting people of color to hardships and disadvantages in every area of life. And whereas the City Council of the City of East Lansing believes in the sanctity, dignity, and worth of all human beings. And whereas racism and social inequities is a heinous social system with multiple dimensions, it is internalized and interpersonal, it is systemic, institutional, or structural, and it is a system of structuring opportunity, advantage, and assigning value and worth based on how one looks or social status. Whereas we recognize the City of East Lansing's collective prosperity depends upon the equitable access to opportunity for every resident, regardless of the color of their skin or social status. Whereas racism and social inequities causes persistent discrimination and disparate outcomes in many areas of life, including housing, education, employment, criminal justice, an emerging body of research demonstrates that racism itself is a social detriment of health. And whereas it has been proven that racism is linked to worse health outcomes for Black people, most recently highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic, but demonstrated in the high rates of infant mortality, maternal death, breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, hypertension, mental health crisis, and diabetes in Black communities. And whereas the City of East Lansing do by declare racism a public health crisis, be it further resolved that the City of East Lansing supports all additional efforts in the City of East Lansing and the state of Michigan and nationwide to address public health disparities due to racism. And that was a partial reading of the resolution that you have before you. As we discussed last week, this resolution was written with the counsel and advisement of Councilmember Dana Watson and with our HRC. And it is before you tonight for approval.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your work on this. And I'm actually going to hand over the mic to Councilmember Watson if they so wish to speak on the issue.
So I want to thank the Human Rights Commission, and I also want to thank Elaine and the City of East Lansing. And thank you, Mayor Stevens, for allowing me to be a part of this process and recommending that I be a part of the process. our summer got really rough and heated. I began before my appointment as a protester, and it was catapulted due to the killing of George Floyd. And watching our nation and state and county and cities come together with these resolutions to announce something as a public health crisis that has been going on and on and on for centuries is very meaningful. And something I very much appreciate about our resolution is not only talking about racism as a public health crisis, which is something our schools can talk about and something people can see and read and learn more about, or see that it's something that's recognized, but also there's strategies in there to hold ourselves accountable to a racial equity lens, whether that's individually, group-wise, or organizationally. And so I'm glad for our progress. I'm glad to be a part of this team and glad to bring this forward to the City Council.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you for your work on this. And sincerely, thank you for being here with us. Other council members, comments, support? If not, I'll look for a motion, and of course there can be comments on that as well. Go ahead, Lisa, Jesse, either.
Thank you. You know, we see the effects of racism delivered in mental health and disparate health outcomes in many, many ways. Infant mortality, maternal health, certainly COVID. But for me, one of the most startling realizations was when I was in my 40s, I realized how many missing dads there were, by which I mean my friends' dads died decades younger than my dad. My dad has since died, but I remember looking up in my late 30s, early 40s, and realizing that my friends' dads weren't with them anymore. And my dad meant a lot to me. And I just thought about how wrong that was. Just to experience that absence, just because of things that might have been preventable, things that might have been discussed or tested for had their dad looked more like my dad at the skin level. And there is no difference. There was no difference with their relationships with their fathers than mine. The only difference was in a social construct about a pigment layer. And in some ways, you know, I'm sure skeptics are out there saying, well, you know, the city is not exactly a public health delivery system, but we are, in the sense that we look at how we value everyone who lives in this community. And we value all moms in this community. We value all babies. We value everybody's dad. I just thank you, Councilmember Watson, for bringing this to us. And thank you, as always, Ms. Hardy, because I have to admit that addressing a public health issue through the City Council wouldn't have originally occurred to me, but it's one of the many, many ways we address the needs and the importance, the value of everyone in this community. So thank you very much.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, my comments really echo Councilmember Babcock's comments. I'm incredibly honored to be able to serve during this time, which I think is a very pivotal time in our history. I do think that this time will be looked back at as a fork in the road. And I think we've got, I think we have to keep pushing to advance equity, to keep diversity at the top of our priority list, to really recognize that everyone in our community deserves the same opportunities. And I think that this is a very strong document to support that. So thanks.
Councilmember Bacon.
think as I'm sitting here thinking about this, I know there's somebody listening and they're thinking racism is a public health crisis and they're thinking this is a Black issue. For racism to be a public health crisis, an everyone issue, and when I envision the impact of racism, thinking sort of like what Lisa's talking about, I picture lost potential. I think of the energy, the potential wasted on this subject. And you may assume it's wasted only in your community. The level of the inventors, the scientists, the people who are lost to the destructive power of racism that would have solved many of the problems that you now face, or their energy was resolved to work on this subject matter. If they're, like we're saying, a resolution to this subject, that energy could be converted to what should be the American ideal. So it is a public health crisis, and it impacts you directly, no matter what race you are. And if you're not willing to deal with it, you're losing. You're losing. And if you assume America's great and you really want America to be great, then deal with this subject so it can live out to its full potential and be the nation that we all believe it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Bacon. And before I look for a motion, I'll make a similar comment. And last time this was presented, I touched on one of the items here, and I read this through a few times after, and I want to touch on the first point, the first whereas statement, and tell something maybe a little bit personal. So, whereas race is a social construct with no basis in human biology, it was created to uphold the system of oppression for Black and brown people. When I was really young, I had a conversation with my mom that probably a lot of people of color have had with their parents. And it started from something that I thought was really insignificant when I was young. We went to the grocery store. I lived in a fairly predominantly white area. And as we were leaving the grocery store, my mom got stopped on her way out of the store, and they asked to check her receipt. Now, everybody else is walking by. And when I say everybody else, I mean everybody else, because I was a kid. I didn't see really why we were being stopped versus somebody else. My mom was angry. It was post 9/11. It was a time where she had gone to this grocery store basically every other day, pick up things for our family. And she got home and she wasn't crying. She was at a certain point where she just didn't feel like she was comfortable in her own city anymore. And I was a kid, so I asked why. Why did we get stopped versus somebody else? And the conversation that a lot of people have, and especially Black people in this country have to have maybe more an extent than I did, but just being treated differently when your mom has to tell you that you might be treated differently because of something that you can't control. And it's a constant crisis, and it affects policy, it affects healthcare, it affects poverty, it affects education, and it affects people's perceptions of what the real issues in our country are. This is a deep issue, and there is a reason why you call it a public health crisis. There is a reason why this resolution is so expansive and why I'm so moved by it, because it addresses many of at least the outcomes of what racism does to a nation. So we continue to take steps in this city, moving towards a more equitable community, because equity, and I've said this before, is not something that a single resolution or a single piece of policy does. It's constant work. And this is another step in that work, and I'm proud to be on this council. I'm proud to be here. And I'm proud to be a force for a more equitable community here. So thank you for everybody that put in the work for this. And with that, I'll look for a motion. I'll maybe suggest somebody that had a direct hand in the resolution to if they want to make a
Ms.
motion.
Watson?
Like to make a motion. Hold on a second. I would like to make a motion to approve a resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis in East Lansing.
Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Bacon. Any more discussion? All right. Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Wonderful. That passes unanimously. Before we head out today, I want to take a point of personal privilege to talk about something I'm really thankful for and something that I don't say enough. We have gone through an incredibly difficult time in this city, both with challenges that have been presented to us as a city, but also the pandemic really throwing a wrench in a lot of the great work that folks have been doing. I tend to come on and I tend to thank individual departments and staff members for their work and their effort. But I just want to point out that the team that we have at the City of East Lansing is incredible. We have not missed a beat. There have been issues and there have been bumps in the road, certainly. But whether it's our IT department making sure people can work at home, whether it's our clerk's office making sure that election runs smoothly, whether it's our finance department making sure that we have all the available information to make educated decisions going forward, or whether it's our building and planning department sending about 70 notices for Zoom meetings that we all have to coordinate and somebody has to staff. Our City of East Lansing staff has been incredible. And I just want to say that as much as I can because it's Thanksgiving and I want to be thankful for that. So George, huge kudos to your team, constantly pushing the agenda and setting a standard that will not be met by many people, but it is met by our staff. So thank you for that. And I'm very, very thankful. So
Thank you for the kind words, Mayor, and happy Thanksgiving to all.
happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Stay safe. That concludes our meeting. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Night.
Thanks, everyone.